She thought swapping the IVF sample would stay hidden. Until I called the clinic and spoke up, Mara had always imagined this moment in her head. The soft morning light spilling into the room, the sound of birds outside, the tiny heartbeat flickering on a screen. After years of hope and heartbreak, it felt almost unreal to be sitting in the fertility clinic, clutching the papers that confirmed she was finally pregnant. She smiled, trying to hold back tears, and glanced at the nurse standing beside her. Daniela, the clinic coordinator, had always been warm and calm. Her kind brown eyes and gentle voice had put Mara at ease the very first time she walked through the clinic's glass doors. Over the months, as Mara had come and gone for consultations, blood tests, and injections, Daniela had become a small anchor in her chaotic life. Mara trusted her completely, or at least she thought she did. Everything seemed perfect that morning. The IVF had worked. The doctors were thrilled, and the clinic staff congratulated her warmly. Mara left the clinic feeling lighter than she had in years. She called her husband Jacob and shared the news, hearing his voice crack with happiness on the other end of the line. But over the next few days, Mara noticed things she couldn't explain. It started with small inconsistencies. A date on a form didn't match the date she remembered the procedure happening. Another form had a blood type that didn't match her own. At first, she brushed it off. Clinics were busy places. Mistakes happened. Yet something in Daniela's behavior felt different. When Mara asked about the dates and forms, Daniela smiled a little too tightly and replied, "Don't worry, sweetie. Everything is fine. These things happen all the time. Your pregnancy is healthy, and that's what matters." But Mara couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Daniela's eyes, which usually radiated calm and patience, sometimes flickered with something Mara couldn't name, an almost imperceptible tension, a flicker of worry. One afternoon, as Mara waited for her routine checkup, she happened to walk past the nurse's station. A low voice caught her attention. "It's done. No one will ever know," Daniela said, her tone tight, careful, but not quiet enough. Mara froze. She couldn't hear the other side of the conversation clearly, but it was enough. Something had happened. Something secret. Something that Daniela was desperate to hide. Her heart pounded. She told herself to calm down. Maybe she had misheard. Maybe it wasn't about her. Maybe she was overthinking. But deep down, a seed of doubt had been planted. Over the next few days, Mara's life became a careful balancing act between joy and suspicion. She didn't want to ruin the happiness she had finally found. Every time she looked at her ultrasound, every time she felt a small flutter of movement inside her, she told herself, "This is real. This is mine." Still, the questions lingered. She started keeping a small notebook. Every form she signed, every email she received, every appointment was recorded meticulously. She even started taking photos of the paperwork. It wasn't paranoia, she told herself. It was preparation. She needed facts, not feelings. Then came the second clue. Daniela had been unusually attentive during one appointment, hovering slightly too close, asking too many questions. "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" "How's your stress level? Any concerns at all?" she asked. Mara noticed the nervous glance Daniela cast toward the storage room where the IVF samples were kept. It was subtle, but it was there. Mara didn't confront her. Not yet. She wasn't ready, but she started paying attention to the small things: who came in and out of the storage area, the timing of paperwork, even the way Daniela handled phone calls. Something was being hidden, and Mara was determined to find out what. One evening, after another routine appointment, Mara found herself walking past the clinic's front desk. The receptionist, a cheerful woman named Anika, was on the phone. Mara paused, pretending to tie her shoe, but she caught a few words that made her blood run cold. The transfer went wrong. They can't know. Cover it up. Mara's stomach dropped. The words were incomplete, and she didn't know the full context. But she didn't need to. Something had been done to her IVF sample, something Daniela had tried to hide. She left the clinic that day in a daze. The excitement and joy she had felt a week ago now mingled with fear and disbelief. Her mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. That night, Mara sat at the kitchen table, staring at her notebook. She traced her finger over the dates, the names, the forms. She thought of the phone conversation, of Daniela's tense glances, of the unexplained inconsistencies. She realized she had two choices: ignore it and hope it was a mistake, or investigate and face whatever truth might come. Mara knew she couldn't ignore it. The next day, she called the clinic, but not to confront Daniela. She spoke to a different staff member, carefully explaining her concerns in neutral terms. She asked about verification procedures, about how samples were tracked and documented. She didn't accuse anyone, she only wanted to know the truth. The staff member, caught off guard, explained the process in detail. Mara listened carefully, noting every step. And then, in a moment she would never forget, the staff member inadvertently confirmed a gap, a missing check in the chain of custody for her sample. Mara felt a mixture of relief and dread. Relief, because she now had evidence. Dread, because she knew the person responsible had been clever and careful. This wasn't a simple mistake. It had been deliberate. Back at home, she shared none of this with Jacob. He didn't need more stress. Mara needed time to plan. She needed to understand exactly what had happened before anyone else knew. As she pored over her notes that night, she realized the depth of the deception. Someone had tried to take away the future she had fought for. Someone had thought they could hide the truth, bury it under polite smiles and careful words. Mara's anger simmered quietly, but it wasn't reckless. It was focused, patient, and determined. She wasn't going to shout, to storm the clinic, to confront Daniela in a scene. No, she would do it smart. She would speak up, but on her terms, and with proof that could not be ignored. The story wasn't over. Mara understood that now. The IVF had worked, yes, but someone had tried to steal that miracle from her, and she would not let it go unnoticed. As she closed her notebook and prepared for bed, a single thought repeated in her mind. She thought it would stay hidden. She thought no one would find out. She was wrong. Mara drifted off to sleep with a quiet resolve. The next step was clear. She would uncover the truth, and she would do it carefully, strategically. The perfect lie was only perfect until someone decided to speak up. And Mara was ready to speak. Mara woke up the next morning with a mix of determination and unease. She had thought about the phone call she made to the clinic for hours. Something in the staff member's voice had given her a small, quiet confirmation that her fears were not just her imagination. There had been a gap in the chain of custody for her IVF sample. Someone had tampered with it. Or at least, someone had acted in a way that should not have happened. But Mara did not panic. She had learned over the years that panic made people careless. And she was not careless. Not this time. She began by gathering everything she had: emails, appointment slips, lab results, and copies of forms she had carefully photographed during her visits. She made a folder on her laptop titled Important and organized everything by date. Every detail mattered. Even the tiniest difference in handwriting or signature could be important. Her next step was to pay closer attention at the clinic. Mara continued her appointments as normal, smiling and asking questions politely. She watched Daniela carefully, observing her movements, noting her conversations, and even the moments when she was out of the room. Daniela seemed calm, but Mara noticed subtle signs of tension. The quick glance toward the storage room, the way she sometimes touched her hair when speaking, the way her smile tightened just a little too much. Mara also paid attention to the people around Daniela. Nurses, receptionists, and lab technicians, they all had routines, habits, and moments of distraction. Mara kept mental notes of who seemed nervous when Daniela was near, who looked confused, and who avoided eye contact. She didn't speak about her suspicions to anyone at the clinic. Not yet. She needed proof, not rumors. One afternoon, Mara returned to the clinic for her regular checkup. She arrived early, pretending to browse the small gift section near the entrance. From there, she could see the staff moving around, making phone calls and preparing samples for other patients. She noticed a young lab technician, barely out of college, carrying a tray toward the storage room. Mara's heart quickened. She followed discreetly, pretending to look at brochures. From the corner of her eye, she saw the technician hesitate at the storage door, glance around, and then quietly place the tray inside. Mara noted the time, the technician's name, and the specific sample on the tray. It seemed routine, but she knew she was gathering pieces of a puzzle. Later that week, Mara decided to dig deeper. She contacted the clinic again, this time asking very specific questions about verification procedures. She didn't mention her own case. Instead, she asked hypotheticals, as if she were curious about how the system worked. The staff member on the line was patient and informative. She explained the steps, how samples were logged, how they were stored, and how transfers were verified. Mara listened carefully, comparing the explanation with the forms she had in her folder. It was then she noticed a small discrepancy, a missing check that should have been recorded during her procedure. Mara's mind raced. This was not an accident. Someone had intentionally skipped a step. But why? And who? Over the next few days, Mara spent hours at home, reviewing every email, every document, every detail she had collected. She created a timeline of events, noting the exact moments when forms were signed, when appointments happened, and when samples were moved. She even color-coded it, green for verified steps, red for missing or suspicious steps. Her investigation began to form a picture. Someone had interfered with her IVF sample. She didn't yet know who, but the pattern suggested someone with access and authority, someone who knew the procedures inside out. Mara's mind returned again and again to Daniela. The coordinator had always been present during her appointments. She had always had access, and her nervous behavior lately made Mara's suspicions stronger. Yet Mara did not confront Daniela. Not now. She had learned that subtlety was more powerful than anger. She was quiet, controlled, and patient. Every action she took was calculated, every step designed to gather proof, not create drama. One evening, Mara met with her husband, Jacob. She explained the inconsistencies in general terms, careful not to accuse anyone directly. "I'm not saying anything happened," she said, "but I'm going to double-check everything, just to be safe." Jacob nodded, trusting her instincts as always. "If anyone tried to mess with this," he said softly, "I know you'll find out." Mara smiled, grateful for his support, but she did not reveal the growing storm in her mind. The following week, Mara returned to the clinic for another routine appointment. She was calm on the outside, but inside, her senses were alert. She noticed Daniela approaching her desk, smiling as usual. "Good morning, Mara," Daniela said cheerfully, unaware of Mara's careful observation. "Good morning," Mara replied. "I just had a quick question about verification procedures. Can you walk me through them again?" Daniela's smile faltered slightly. She hesitated before answering, carefully choosing her words. Mara noted the pause. She had expected it. "Of course," Daniela said finally, her voice steady. "We follow strict protocols to ensure everything is accurate." She explained the steps, but Mara noticed that she avoided mentioning a few minor details that she had already documented from her previous calls. Mara nodded politely, pretending to be satisfied. On the way out, she made a quiet mental note of every step Daniela had skipped in her explanation. These details would be important later. That evening, Mara decided to take a bold but careful step. She contacted an external compliance board explaining her concerns about general procedural gaps at IVF clinics. She did not mention Daniela by name, only her observations and questions about verification standards. The board responded quickly, offering to review her documents anonymously and ensure the clinic's procedures were properly audited. Mara felt a sense of relief. She was no longer acting alone. There were professionals who could check her claims, and their involvement meant that no one could easily cover up a mistake. But she didn't stop there. Mara continued her quiet surveillance. She kept visiting the clinic, observing interactions, taking notes, and checking dates. Every small inconsistency was recorded in her notebook. Every nervous glance, every avoided question, every hurried movement was a piece of the puzzle. A few weeks later, Mara noticed something unexpected. Daniela had begun acting differently. Her calm, confident demeanor sometimes cracked, replaced by subtle signs of anxiety. She checked Mara's forms more than usual, asked extra questions, and lingered near the storage room when Mara entered. Mara didn't need to guess anymore. Daniela knew something was wrong, and she was trying to protect herself. But Mara was ready. She had patience, proof, and strategy. She did not confront Daniela directly. She did not make threats or raise her voice. She simply continued gathering evidence quietly and methodically until the truth would become impossible to hide. One quiet evening, Mara sat at her kitchen table, her notebook open and her documents spread around her like a map. She traced the timeline once more, noting every suspicious gap, every unexplained step, and every moment of nervous behavior. The pieces fit together now, forming a clear pattern. Mara leaned back in her chair and allowed herself a small, quiet smile. She didn't feel triumphant yet. That would come later. But she felt in control, and that was powerful. The perfect lie could not last forever. Someone had tried to hide the truth, and Mara was determined to uncover it. She knew the next steps would require even more care. She would have to speak to the clinic formally, submit her evidence, and ensure that the external board reviewed it. But she also knew she would not rush. Patience had been her greatest tool so far, and it would remain so. As she closed her notebook and looked out the window at the evening sky, Mara felt a sense of quiet strength. Daniela might think she had control, that her actions were invisible, but Mara knew the truth, and one day soon, that truth would no longer be hidden. Mara didn't feel fear. She didn't feel panic. She felt focus. She felt strategy. She felt the calm satisfaction of knowing she had the upper hand, not because she had power over anyone, but because she had the truth on her side, and that truth would not stay quiet forever. Mara had spent weeks quietly gathering evidence. Every form, every email, every subtle inconsistency was carefully documented. Her notebook, once small and simple, had grown into a detailed record of events. Now, she felt ready to take the next step, not recklessly, not angrily, but with precision and control. The morning was bright when Mara arrived at the clinic. She walked in calmly, smiling at the receptionist as if she were just another patient. But today was different. Today, she had a purpose beyond routine appointments and small talk. She was here to speak up. Mara requested to meet with the clinic director. "I have some concerns about verification procedures," she said politely. "I'd like to review some documents with you if possible." The receptionist looked surprised but nodded, making a quick call. Within minutes, Mara was escorted to a quiet office, away from the busy clinic floor. The director, a middle-aged man with kind eyes and a formal manner, greeted her warmly. "Mara, how can I help you today?" Mara smiled, but it was calm and determined, not warm. I've noticed some inconsistencies in my IVF records, she began. She laid out her notebook and organized documents on the table. I don't know if these are mistakes or something more serious, but I think it's important that someone reviews them. The director's expression shifted slightly. He leaned forward, scanning her notes. These are detailed, he said. Very thorough. Have you brought this to anyone else at the clinic before? No, Mara replied. I wanted to speak to you first. I've also contacted an external compliance board. They can review the procedures anonymously and ensure everything is correct. The director nodded slowly, clearly impressed by her preparation. You've done a very careful job. Thank you for bringing this to our attention. We will investigate immediately. Mara felt a small surge of relief. The investigation was no longer just in her mind. It had begun officially. Over the next few days, the clinic staff became noticeably tense. Mara's careful, polite inquiries had sent a ripple of worry through the office. Daniela, once calm and collected, now looked nervous in Mara's presence. Her usual bright smile sometimes faltered, replaced by a tight-lipped expression that betrayed worry. Mara noticed the quick glances Daniela exchanged with other staff members. The atmosphere around her was different, charged, careful, cautious. Mara continued to attend her appointments as usual, keeping her composure. She didn't confront Daniela directly, didn't accuse her in front of others. She simply observed. Every small mistake, every hurried movement, every nervous glance was a confirmation that she had been right to suspect something. One afternoon, Mara received a phone call from the compliance board. They had reviewed her documents and had begun their own independent investigation. We found discrepancies that need immediate attention, the investigator explained. It appears some verification steps were skipped during your procedure. We need the clinic to provide a full explanation. Mara listened carefully, asking questions politely. She didn't interrupt, didn't express anger. The board's involvement was exactly what she had hoped for. The truth would not remain hidden this time. The next day, Mara returned to the clinic to continue her routine checkup. Daniela approached her, her smile strained. Good morning, Mara, she said softly. Good morning, Mara replied. Her tone was calm, neutral, polite. She had no need for confrontation. The investigation was already in motion. Daniela's hands trembled slightly as she handed Mara a folder of forms to sign. Mara noticed and made a mental note. The change was subtle, but it was enough to tell her that Daniela was aware the truth was coming out. By the end of the week, the clinic director called Mara in again. We've reviewed your concerns and conducted a preliminary audit, he said. His voice was formal but not harsh. It appears there were procedural failures in your case. Some steps were not documented correctly, and certain verification checks were missed. Mara nodded calmly. I appreciate the transparency, she said. She felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The truth was finally surfacing. The director hesitated for a moment, then continued. We are taking immediate action to correct these issues and ensure that it does not happen again. Staff will be retrained and we are reviewing all records thoroughly. Mara's heart beat steadily. She didn't need to gloat or make threats. The process itself was delivering justice. The careful, patient work she had done, the documentation, the observations, the careful calls, was paying off. At evening, Mara met with Jacob. She explained that the clinic was conducting a full audit and that her concerns had been validated. The truth is coming out, she said quietly. Jacob smiled, relief evident on his face. You did this so carefully, he said. I knew you would. Over the following week, Mara continued to gather information, watching the clinic discreetly. Daniela's behavior became increasingly nervous. She double-checked forms, lingered near storage areas, and sometimes seemed unsure how to act around Mara. But Mara remained calm. She had proof, and the truth was already in motion. Finally, the compliance board completed their review. Mara received an official letter confirming that procedural failures had occurred. The board requested a full explanation from the clinic and recommended corrective actions. Mara read the letter carefully, noting the exact details. Every skipped verification step, every missing signature, and every deviation from protocol was documented clearly. Mara felt a quiet satisfaction. She didn't feel triumphant, didn't celebrate loudly. She felt in control, confident, and prepared. Daniela might have thought she could hide her actions, but now they were impossible to ignore. The clinic director called Mara for a final meeting. "We have completed our internal review," he said. "The investigation shows that one of our staff members failed to follow proper procedures. We are taking all necessary steps, including retraining staff and reviewing all records." Mara listened, her expression calm. She did not need to ask names. The outcome was clear. Justice was being served, quietly but effectively. After leaving the clinic, Mara walked slowly, reflecting on the past weeks. She had not yelled, threatened, or acted out of anger. She had observed, documented, and spoken up strategically. The truth had revealed itself through patience, preparation, and persistence. That evening, Mara sat at her kitchen table, reviewing her notes one last time. The final step would be to ensure that her case was fully documented and that the clinic's corrective actions were monitored. She felt a sense of closure approaching, but she also knew she needed to remain vigilant. Daniela had underestimated Mara. She had assumed that no one would notice, that mistakes could be hidden under polite smiles and careful words. But Mara had shown that truth, carefully pursued, could never remain hidden. As she closed her notebook, Mara thought about the journey. The fear, the uncertainty, the quiet anger, it had all been channeled into action. And that action had made a difference. She had not needed to scream, to threaten, or to confront. She had simply done what was right, with patience, strategy, and calm determination. The perfect lie had been broken. The truth was now clear, undeniable, and impossible to hide. And Mara knew that the final chapter was approaching. Mara sat in the quiet of her living room, the soft hum of the evening around her. She held the official letters from the compliance board and the clinic in her hands. Every word was a small victory, every sentence proof that the truth could no longer be hidden. Daniela, once confident and untouchable in her role at the clinic, had underestimated her. But Mara had been patient, careful, and precise. The clinic had completed its full internal review. Staff had been retrained, records corrected, and the procedural gaps she had discovered were being officially addressed. Mara read each page carefully, noting the details. She didn't feel the need to celebrate loudly. There was no gloating, no dramatic confrontation. The results spoke for themselves. Daniela's reaction had been noticeable. During Mara's final appointment, the coordinator avoided her eyes, her usual confident tone replaced by a polite, tense formality. She double-checked forms, lingered near the storage areas, and even seemed uncertain when answering questions from other staff. Mara observed quietly, noting every detail. The anxiety that had been flickering in Daniela for weeks was now more visible. It was not Mara's anger that caused the change. It was her quiet determination, her careful collection of evidence, and her decision to speak up through the right channels. Daniela realized the truth was out, and there was no way to hide it. The compliance board's involvement had ensured that the truth was recognized outside the clinic. Mara had done her part, providing all the necessary documentation and observations, but it was the impartial review that made the results official. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction knowing that the procedures would be corrected, that other patients would be protected from similar mistakes in the future. At home, Mara reflected on the journey. The months of hope, anxiety, and meticulous observation had been exhausting. but they had led to justice. She thought about the moments when she had questioned herself, when fear had crept in, and yet she had persisted. She had remained calm, patient, and focused. And now the outcome proved that her approach had been correct. Jacob noticed the change in her demeanor. That evening he sat beside her and gently took her hand. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "You didn't let fear or anger control you. You stayed strong." Mara smiled, feeling the warmth of his support. She didn't need to explain the details. The relief and quiet satisfaction were enough. At the clinic, Daniela's position had changed quietly but significantly. The audit and review had identified her as the staff member responsible for the procedural gaps. While there were no criminal charges, because Mara's IVF procedure had ultimately succeeded and no one was physically harmed, Daniela faced professional consequences. Her license had been suspended pending review, and she was no longer in a position to coordinate procedures. The authority she had once wielded with confidence was gone. Mara didn't take pleasure in Daniela's downfall. She did not feel triumph over another's loss. What she felt was justice, balance, and the quiet satisfaction that truth, carefully pursued, had prevailed. The process had been fair, and the outcome had been correct. For Mara, the real victory was the protection of her own family's future. Her IVF pregnancy was progressing smoothly. Every kick, every heartbeat, every small movement reminded her of the miracle she had fought for. And she knew that by speaking up, she had ensured that future patients would not face the same hidden risks she had uncovered. Weeks later, the clinic sent Mara a formal letter of apology, acknowledging the mistakes in her procedure and outlining the corrective actions taken. They expressed gratitude for her careful documentation and her decision to bring the issues to light. Mara read the letter slowly, letting each sentence sink in. The acknowledgement of the truth, the steps taken to prevent future errors, were more satisfying than any dramatic confrontation could have been. Mara realized that her method of quiet investigation, patient observation, and careful documentation had been the most powerful form of action. She had not shouted, demanded revenge, or made public accusations. She had simply acted with intelligence, calm, and integrity. The results had spoken for themselves. One afternoon, Mara visited the clinic for a routine checkup, this time without anxiety or suspicion. She noticed the changes, the new procedures, the organized documentation, and the staff's professional behavior. The environment was different, healthier, safer. She felt a quiet pride in knowing that her actions had contributed to that positive change. Daniela was no longer coordinating appointments. Mara did not speak to her, nor did she feel the need to. The professional consequences had already been delivered. Daniela's quiet exit from her position was sufficient, a natural result of the truth emerging. Mara understood that this was justice without malice. At home, Mara prepared for her growing family, the house filled with warmth and quiet anticipation. She reflected on the months of uncertainty, the secret doubts, and the careful planning she had undertaken. Every small action she had taken, every note she had written, every phone call and observation had been part of a larger, deliberate strategy. And it had worked. Mara thought about the lessons she had learned. Patience, careful observation, and the decision to speak up through the proper channels were more powerful than anger or rash action. Truth had a way of emerging, and when combined with intelligence and preparation, it could not be denied. As she prepared for bed one evening, Mara looked at the notebook she had used to track everything. It was full now, but it represented more than just evidence. It represented her strength, her careful thinking, and her determination to ensure that right prevailed over wrong. "You've been through so much," he said. "And yet, you handled it all with grace. I'm proud of you." Mara smiled softly, feeling the weight of relief and satisfaction. She didn't need to explain. The journey had been hers, and the results spoke for themselves. In the quiet of the night, Mara reflected on the path she had taken. She had turned fear into strategy, anxiety into action, and suspicion into proof. The deception that had threatened to steal her future had been exposed, not through anger or confrontation, but through careful, patient, and thoughtful action. The perfect lie had been broken. The truth had emerged. Justice had been served, and Mara's life, her growing family, and her sense of integrity had been preserved. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a deep, calm breath. The struggle was over. The consequences had been delivered, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done what was right filled her with peace. Mara had spoken up. She had acted wisely. She had let the truth take its natural course. And in doing so, she had not only protected her own future but ensured that fairness and justice would be upheld. The story that began with doubt and fear had ended with clarity and balance. Mara smiled in the darkness, feeling a quiet triumph. She had faced deception, she had faced uncertainty, and she had faced fear. But in the end, careful thought, patience, and truth had won, and that was enough.